Mine says 59 too. We already agreed double time rules.
Good evening. What are we doing? Today is, hello. Today is Tuesday, May 27th, and this is a business meeting for the Cave Creek Unified School District. It is 6 p.m. Roll call, all members of the cabinet are present. Dr. Pletnick, Dr. Hendrickson, Dr. Jensen, and Mr. Dolezal, and all members of the board are present. Item 1.2, Pledge Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right, I already did roll call, so we're ahead. All right, item 1.4, formal adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. Item 2.1, fiscal year 2025-26 proposed budget presentation, presented by Dr. Pletnick. It's all yours.
Good evening, President Greer, board members. Tonight we're going to present the 2025-26 fiscal year 26 proposed budget. Just a few reminders that we have to propose our budget no later than July 5th. Once we do this proposal, we do have to have it on our website for those 10 days, and then we do have to have a final adoption which would be the next governing board meeting for the FY26 budget. So I wanted to go over, before we dive into the budget, of just some terms and some reminders. So as we speak about the budget, if you have any questions on these terms or the terminology used, we can kind of get that out of the way so everything can be crystal clear for you. The proposed budget sets the budget capacity limit. It's not actually how much we spend, it's how much we can spend. And so when you look at the numbers on the proposed budget, what we're doing is essentially setting up, this is our expected expenditures for the next school year, and it sets by law how much we can tax. And so when we look at this proposed budget, what we're going to understand is that the tax rate that we do use is generated off of this proposed budget. So once it's adopted later on in the summertime, I'll be working with the Maricopa County Superintendent's Office to actually set the tax rate. And as you know, we don't receive any state aid. So what we depend upon is that tax rate because we are locally funded as a school district. So again, the expenditures will appear in the annual financial report. And if you remember the timeline from the last meeting, we won't actually see the FY26 annual financial report until the year 2027. So this October, we'll see what we actually spent this school year in our annual financial report. Now, the proposed budget can be revised, and it will be revised. So it's mandatory in May to revise it, but we're also going to see this year a September revision. And why we're going to see a September revision is because we're using the preliminary budget forms because the state has not set their budget. So when that happens and the state doesn't set their budget in May, we have to continue forward. But what we do is we use last year's numbers. So we would expect if everything follows suit, when they pass the state budget, we receive our 2% inflation increase for our ADM funding, which is $5,013 this year. You're going to see that in the budget documents, again, $5,013 instead of $5,113. So that's part of the reason in September we do have to, again, revise the budget, because once the budget's set and any kind of statutory or legislative decisions are made, we have to adjust our budget accordingly, and that occurs in September. Then we also can revise again in December. And again, remember, we did not revise this December because we were within 1% of our general budget limit, but we can revise in December. And then the final revision does happen in May. So there is one other time that there could be an April revision if the AEL, aggregate spending limit, it doesn't go through, then that changes everything for all of us at that point. And now, student funding in this fiscal year 26 is determined by student count for the 25-26 school year. So when we're looking at these student counts, we have to estimate. So that's the tricky part of setting a budget, is we have to estimate and project how many students we are going to have next year. The tricky part with that is that we don't want to be too high, because then we'll have to revise our budget down. If we're too low, we also have to worry about our tax rate, because remember, we set our tax rate, that's the amount of cash we have coming in, and we have to make sure we have enough cash to operate within our budget. So it's kind of a tricky little situation as we go through this budget to make sure we kind of hit a sweet spot within that range. Now, again, average daily membership, if I say the word ADM, that's our average daily membership. It's based upon the district enrollment in those 100 days, that important 100-day count. And if you hear weighted ADM, that's a state formula that provides additional weight for students. So if a student is with us the whole 100 days, we don't just get 1.0. It also depends upon what grade level they are. And it also depends if they have needs, such as special education, and so we receive additional funding. And again, that's why sometimes when people hear how much per student, it's not straightforward, 5,013. It depends upon their grade level and also their needs. The other reminder is funding is done in, we always refer to the different buckets. And so the use of the dollars in each bucket is restricted by the Uniform System of Financial Records, but also state statute can limit what the use is. So unlike in the private sector where, well, I can just move money from here to cover this or move money over there, we have to maintain the money for its intended use, either by the USFR or by statutory requirements. So that is part of the tricky part. If you see, well, we have this money over here, well, we can't use it, such as let's go with the Instructional Improvement Fund, 50% payout for teacher pay, but then it would be restricted for things like dropout prevention programs for the use of the rest of it. So some examples of the buckets that you see within the budget is our M&O, or Maintenance and Operation bucket, DAA, which is District Additional Assistance, which that's our capital, our Classroom Site Funds, CSF, and then also federal funds. So our IDEA grant, our title grants, those are the federal funds. They usually carry the most restrictions with them, and they typically have specific uses for what they can be used for. The other tricky part of federal funds is they may require maintenance of effort, such as our special education or our IDEA, which requires us as a district to fund so much money in order to receive those grants. So we have to meet a maintenance of effort, and another example would be our child nutrition. We have to pay so much out of our M&O in order to receive the funding. So we have to have that percentage that's expected for us to contribute within those. The next piece is to remember budget-controlled versus cash-controlled funds. Now, budget-controlled funds are set by the state using a formula or legislative appropriations. So these are formula-based funds that have to be used for certain reasons. And they are decided upon how much you receive based upon those formulas or appropriations. District is, the spending has to be dependent upon that formula. But we also must have that tax, which I said, from the taxpayer base in order to actually pay our bills. So we have to generate those taxes and that revenue from taxes in order to have enough cash in the bank to pay the bills. Now, there are a few budget form updates that I want to make you aware of. And again, these budget forms came out Thursday of last week, and we were shown some of the changes. And as I go through these, they were positive transparency changes. And I'm actually very glad that they did put these changes on, because it does make some things a little clearer, especially for our public. The one piece that is the biggest change is the budgets added multiple lines for budget carry forward. And so remember what carry forward, as I discussed carry forward, we're going to we budgeted approximately $34.6 million this year. When we find our end of the year expenses in October, say that comes to $34 million. That means that $2.6 million we didn't spend in FY25, we can move that to FY26. So we've heard that term carry forward a lot in the past couple of months, and these forms have now added a column for that carry forward. And the quote up there is, this provides more transparent information for budget form end users regarding the amounts districts estimate they will maintain for spending after FY 2026 in these budget controlled funds. That is directly from the Auditor General. And that is the rationale of why they added these lines to the budget forms. Now, that allows us to budget and see carry forward rather than budgeting at full capacity. Now, to explain that to you, if you go to the M&O page, page 1 of the budget, what you'll see is we used to have to use every penny. If it was $34.6 million, we had to find a category to put every single dollar into. Now, this year, what we can do is we can budget, and then there's a little column that says carry forward. So if I want to keep $2 million in carry forward, I can go $2 million in carry forward. Then I can just adjust all of those columns accordingly. Where in years past, you had no choice but to fully use every single dollar. So that's why I think and especially as we've talked the past few months, it's very important that they added this carry forward piece. So you can see that, our carry forward is kind of like our savings account, where, we want to keep carry forward available to have reserve. We want 3 months of operating expenses in case something happens. That's where we get it from. If we budget every single penny, we don't have that emergency slush fund. And again, that goes with that aggregate spending limit as well. If that never passes, how do we keep operating? And that comes into play with that. So what you're going to see too, especially on the M&O pages, you're going to see a percentage difference of fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26. There may be like a negative 30%, negative 20% difference. Remember, every single penny was budgeted last year. This year on this proposed budget, what we did is we narrowed it down to, okay, in these columns, what do we want to budget for salaries? What do we want to budget for purchase services? And we were able to get that down to a closer dollar amount to what we truly want to spend. And then, okay, this would give us this much carryover. So it helps us with that. The one thing I do want to say with that, though, is remember, we're in a constant state of movement. And one great example is if we have a special ed contractor, it could be under purchase services, but if we're able to hire someone in our district, that's going to shift from that purchase services to salaries, which is a different function on that sheet, 6100. And again, when I say function, that refers to the USFR and the categories it falls into. So this is kind of a living document, especially when we don't know how many students we have for enrollment. So some examples of where you're going to see the changes. If you look at the FY25 budget form, which was presented 2 weeks ago on this, you can see it had the maintenance operation, the capital, the federal funding, and then the total aggregate, which was about $40.5 million after you took all of those buckets or funding sources. And now if you see the FY26, they added that little column that says budgeted carry forward, and I'm going to come back to that column a little bit later in the presentation. But you can see that we're at $35.4 million, a reduction again. The expected difference is, number one, federal funding decreasing, which we'll talk about, and also student enrollment decreasing, which we'll talk about. So I'm going to stop there for 1 second to see if you have any questions on any of the terminology or the budget forms so I can answer that before we get into the nitty-gritty.
Did you say federal money is decreasing,
Yes.
and why? Just curious.
Funding. There's a number of different reasons for the federal funding decreasing. Less students can result in decreasing less funding from the federal government. Also changes in the formulas. I will tell you last year when we looked at some of our title funds, they used census numbers for the formula, which the census number showed less free and reduced students. But when we actually had those students, when they were having lunch, it was a much greater number, which they did use that greater number, from my understanding, for charter school funding, but not for our funding. Okay, here's another example, and this is from the maintenance operation page. You can see last year in FY25, it just went to a total. And this year, you have those yellow highlighted, and they were nice enough to highlight the changes on the forms in yellow. So you can now see, and I know it's kind of small because it's a very long column, but you can now see where it allows us to maintain that carry forward. So when I did do the budgeting this year, I was able to put carry forward in that box and then budget on the rest of the columns instead of having to use every single dollar. Okay, so some of the budget factors. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty right now. And if you look at the total weighted ADM, again, this is an estimate. We don't know what this is going to be until the kids are in the seats. And part of what goes into the weighted ADM are not only the enrollment in the schools, but also our special ed enrollment is a huge side of that piece. And again, depending upon what student comes back with, if they have a disability, what disability it is, it can change that weighting as well. So this is, again, our estimated FY26 Group B weight, and as you can see, we are down in the weighted ADM. Base level per pupil, like I told you before, it's staying the same for now on these forms in September. Let's all hope the budget passes and we get our increase, and then we'll see that revised. Our assessed valuation of our property, you can see the assessed valuation of the property in our area has increased. And then that results in our tax rate dropping. And so our tax rate will drop because property values are going up. As a district, our capacity, because we have less students, is going down. Therefore, the tax rate will decrease. And yes, and it looks like that means we would be shipping more money down to the state again. Because again, our need is going to be less. And they'll be setting that qualifying tax rate throughout the state for education. Oops, skipped it. Okay, next I'm going to cover enrollment numbers. This is the part we are taking our best estimate at, and as you know, right now it is one of those where we are constantly watching numbers. We're constantly watching enrollment packets come in to try to predict. Now, on the next slide, I separated in columns. So if we did a full rollover, meaning 10th grade goes to 11th grade, 9th grade goes to 10th grade, 4th grade goes to 5th grade, what our enrollment would be. Then what I did is match our average loss at each grade level, what we would see on average. And then the next column takes an extra loss that we presented from school closures. So we're looking at 25% of grades 1 through 5 from Lone Mountain, 15% from DSA, we're those 6th grade moving up into Sonoran Trails, taking a 15% loss. So that estimates what loss we may achieve, well, what that may occur at that point. And then the last column is extra loss plus new enrollment. We're getting new enrollment packets in. I am actually very, very proud right now of our 9th grade, which we have over 30 new enrollment packets coming in to our 9th grade into the high school. So that is good news. Now, will all the enrollments stick? Meaning, will they end up coming here? Not necessarily. So when I did factor in the new enrollment packets, I did take a percentage that will actually attend, and there's a certain percentage that will not attend. So as you can see, if we just did a full rollover, 3,595 students is where we would be at. And then going and budgeting, what we're looking at is if we take the extra loss plus new enrollments, we're down around 3,400 students. Now, if you take the new enrollment packets out, then we were in the 3,300s in that range, just because we received so many new enrollment packets. So that is at the last board meeting. If you remember, I said it could be that 3,300 range. And again, we want to be a little bit more conservative on these numbers, just because, again, when you revise a budget, it's much better to revise it up than to revise it down. And so if you look also, our last day of the school year, our enrollment was 3,823 students. And I highlighted the grades 1 through 6 because, again, those are the affected from the school closures, those affected grade levels. So I just wanted to highlight those grade levels, knowing that that's where, from the school closures, that's where our students would be. There we go. Now, the budget limits. So this is our capacity, how much we can spend based upon those enrollment numbers. If you look at it, FY25, it was just under 28.5 million. Now we're at about 26.5 million, so almost a $2 million M&O decrease. And so that's when Mr. Dolezal talks about living within our means, living within our budget. That's what we're funded for students. So that is what the state funds us. Again, what I'm going to just keep saying is that's on the current 5,013. So that can change if the funding does increase. Our capital allocation is pretty consistent. If you look at historically, as we've lost students, it's down about $240,000 this year again. So we're about $2.2 million in capital funding. Our classroom site fund has increased. There was an increase to $842 for those classroom site funds this year, so that's good news. We do use that for teacher salaries. We also can use it for class size reduction and some of our support staff as well.
And Dr. Pletnick, a large portion of salary goes into, teachers receive classroom site funds to the tune of about $10,000 over the course of a year?
10,400 according to Dr. Henderson. Yes. And that's per every FTE for all of them. So 10,400 of the classroom site fund money goes towards those teachers. Now, important adjustments, and we've seen these at previous board meetings, and the first one is the one-time stipend. We're in year 3 of 3. This predates me, but there was a stipend to go out to teachers in split for 3-year payments. So we are in the 3rd and final year of that. So that has to be taken out of our M&O. So that is part of our M&O funding. And then we saw a rise in our insurance rates to the tune of about $81,000. We did see our workers' compensation decrease slightly. So that's helpful offset. Now, what I will tell you also in talking with the trust who is our insurance provider, why we're seeing that increase is a reevaluation of our property values. And so what they did in 2023, so this was 2 years ago, they reevaluated and assessed our property values, which were much higher at that point. And so now that's where our largest increase in our insurance comes, because our assets are of greater value. Now, we also did a 1% increase for all staff, non-administrative. So that's approximately $226,000. Why I say approximately is as we add staff, hire new teachers, that's going to raise. And then health insurance increase. Dr. Henderson presented this a few weeks back. We are taking that on as a district, not passing that on to our employees like other districts may do. So that is also an expenditure that's increased for us. And again, the ADM, I'll keep saying that over and over, but the funding doesn't reflect the increase. But the other thing you'll also note is in the years past, we've talked about moving $2 million over from capital to M&O. This year in the budget, we did not do that. If you look at our capital allocation of $2.23 million, we moved $1.23 million over to the M&O. But this year we're keeping $1 million in our capital fund. What that's going to do is if we keep our level costs, again, as budgeted, which are approximately $820,000 in capital expenses, that means we're actually increasing our capital carry forward for the first time in years. So it's beginning to right that ship. Now, we'll move on to the federal funding. And federal funding, you can see it's decreased. So the tough part about when federal funding decreases, we have to either say in our title money, cut positions, cut something out of title. In IDA, our special ed funding, we still have students who have needs. So even though we're being funded $300,000 less, we have to service our students. So that money has to come out of somewhere else. So that is, again, I keep talking about SPED, but you're seeing an increase in special education costs. You're seeing the special ed needs in public schools overall increase. So that is something we're going to continue to keep a close eye on. And then you can see our CTE grants have also had a slight decrease. Okay, and before we go to the next steps, sorry, it's a little slow. I want to go back to this slide with the carry forward. So in this budget, you're seeing we're estimating, again, it's an estimate because we won't know what our carry forward from this current fiscal year is to carry forward into next year, the money we didn't spend. This year it was about $2.7 million in M&O. As the budget sits without the state increase, we're about $1.8 million. So to give you an idea, we ate this year about $1 million of carry forward. We had $3.7 million carry forward, and now, again, the rough estimate of what we're carrying forward into next year is about 2.7. Without the state increase, we're looking at going from about 2.7 to 1.8, so about 900. So that's lowering the amount we're spending in carry forward. Now, if we look at it and we take the raises that we said we were going to use carry forward for, our goal would be to stay level about $2.5 million in carry forward. Being at 1.8, if the state does give us that increase, we're going to expect to gain back about $350,000 of that. So that puts us about $350,000 under that $2.5 million carry forward to stay level. Now, with that, if our carry forward comes out higher than the estimated 2.7, we're going to be closer to that 2.5 million as well. If more students show up than what we say, we are going to be well towards that 2.5 million. So that's where that conservative outlook, that's why we're bringing it in. And so, as you can see, we're eating less M&O carry forward already on this projection, and our capital carry forward is increasing. So every time we talk about riding the ship, that process by these numbers is beginning with that. That process is beginning at this point. And again, it's going to be, I keep saying it, if we get our increase, it's going to be much closer than that 1.8 is. And again, that 1.8 million you're going to see reflected on that page 1 of our expenditures. The other piece is if we don't use our expenditures and say I budgeted 6.7 in what equates to teacher salaries, if we're actually at 6.5, that $200,000 would move towards that carry forward. So again, this is why it's all a big estimation, but that's why I think looking at this carry forward and adding this carry forward to the new budget forms is very, very important. And in September, when we actually have our 10-day student count, we're going to get a very good idea of where we're at. And then December budget revision, we'll do another one for sure, just because we want to see where we're at with that. It will give us an even more accurate look because we're closing in the 100-day count at that point. And so the next steps, if approved, we publish the proposed budget, and then it goes for adoption at the next board meeting. So any questions?
Yeah, if you could. There's obviously the closing of the two schools had a big impact on this. There were some positives with less expenses. There were some negatives with the enrollment. But could you speak, especially since, this has been such an issue, and people were wondering how it's all going to shake out. Can you speak, it's kind of, probably putting you on the spot a little bit, sorry, to how different the budget would look had we not closed those schools? Where would we be? What would this look like?
Well, I'll give you one prime example on this, and I'm going to go to a cost that is always a hot button. And let's go to administration costs, and let's look at again, function 2400, which is school administration. And remember, school administration isn't only principals, but it's front office staff of the schools as well. If you look at our FY24 AFR, so our actual amount that we spent, it was $1.36 million for school administrative expenses. As of right now, using the staffing models from our HR department, we've dropped that to about just over $1 million. So that's an example of a cost savings that we said that by closing two schools, what we would see is cost savings in certain areas. One was administration, and so we're seeing that. The other piece is, if you're looking at our expenditures for teacher salaries, that is going to decrease just by the staffing models that have been put into place. That number is decreased as well. So I would have to sit there and do a full rollover and calculate exactly what the full rollover would be for you to get you those exact numbers, which I can absolutely do, and I can get that to the board. But what we're seeing already, and just with the school closures, is those cost savings that we spoke about between the staffing, the administration costs, and so that's what I can say for that at this exact moment. It's a pretty easy calculation if I take a full rollover of students, or even if I take that number of students plus our expected loss, what we could see, and actually I could probably pull it up if you could give me a second, what we can see is just what our M&O would be. If you give me a moment, I can actually pull that.
Well, and Member Fortney and Dr. Pletnick, I believe that was in some of our slideshows throughout in terms of, as we were going through the process, that how much carry forward we would be getting to, and we could make it pretty much one more year. So that's, if we're going 1.8, and again, instead of moving all, the 2 million over, we're moving less of that. So with that, we would be eating through our carry forward from the presentations that we did before in a year at that point in time. So again, like you said, it's a balancing and it's a tough decision based on what can we do for the best for our kids and our families that are here. But we are definitely seeing a savings of money compared to the cost of keeping the schools open. And
if you do look at it, if we did a matching loss estimation, we're looking at just over $27 million for M&O funding. So yes, there is a loss, but even if you look at the difference between that 27.2 to where we were at with 26.5, I mean, you look at just what I stated in the administrative savings of $300,000. So that's not even looking at the teacher salaries of savings. at that point at the estimation. So just a quick, brief piece on that.
Thank you.
Do you want to expand on the CSF allocation? Because that was an interesting conversation we had today that I think brings some stuff to light. When you talk about the different buckets, so we're talking about DSA, which we just talked about 2 weeks ago. So maybe some.
And that's the
Member Moore, do you have a specific question that we can target?
He knows.
It's the instructional improvement fund is what we were discussing.
Yes.
And so last week the discussion was, if we would open up a special education or a dropout prevention program for some of our students who are struggling at the high school, for example, which Dr. Jensen talked about, the pilot program we're running this year, where would that come out of? And one of the things, if we develop a dropout prevention program, we have that instructional improvement funds that we can use where the 50% can be used for the teacher salaries, but that leaves the other 50% for us to use. And if you look at your monthly reports, it's our 020 fund, instructional improvement fund that you'll see on there. And you can see we do have a pretty healthy balance in that fund. So what we can do for a dropout prevention program is fund one through using the instructional improvement funds without touching our M&O. So what that can also do is help fill some of those funding gaps, whether it be the state funding us less or the federal funds funding us less, and using that bucket. And again, on the proposed budget, you'll see page 6, I believe it's on, and you'll see the uses that you can use the instructional improvement fund. It actually lists on, again, transparency, it lists what you can use the instructional improvement funds for, and you'll see that we did budget in money in the instructional improvement fund for dropout prevention.
Which is then very different than operating it as just as it was as a K-6 elementary school.
Correct.
As far as which buckets you're pulling from.
Yes, Member Walker, absolutely.
And that was the 350, right? Was it 350?
Yes.
Okay.
And that amount, we do have more. If the program needed to expand, there is room to expand the program as needed.
Because you have the funds in the bucket, which can only be allocated,
For those
which really
reasons.
starts to make sense, which is why it makes it nice to do the budget. And then
Well, and then Dr.
eye-opening.
Plednick. Yeah, again, it's with the same information that you saw on the slides about federal funding, especially for different programming decreasing. It's why it makes it even more imperative to look at different models and what we can do to help serve all of our students. And again, if we can bring some of those students back and decrease our cost for our special education students, that's great. Again, I would say the first priority, though, is we think we can do and serve our students better, and that's first, and then being able to save money by doing that as well.
And Mr. Dolezal, to speak to that as well, is if you look at our M&O expenditures on our page 1, our M&O expenditures, so you look at purchase services, for example, if we can bring our students back and reduce the amount of purchase services that we're sending students out for, that's money now on the M&O page we also begin to bring back. So that it really benefits in multiple ways, and that 1.8 keeps increasing at that point as we reduce those potential expenditures.
And just to clarify, if you guys build it, they have to come back. It's not they don't have an option to sit there and go, no, I don't want to because I like what I'm doing, so continue to do this. Or is there a...
Yes, Member Moore, for the most part, that's correct. As long as we can offer a free and appropriate public education, then they have to come back. The question becomes, we do need to have the data to show that when they come back, they're successful.
Right. Well, and then you can deliver that service.
Exactly.
Right,
And if the location where they're at, some of them, depending on the contracts and how the conditions under why the student is there, we may have to wait for some of those conditions to have been met before we can pull some of them back. So we would start with, there's many who want to come back. So we will start with the ones who want to, and then as we experience success, hopefully the rest of them want to as well. And if they don't, I mean, at some point, yes, we can say you must.
Right. So there's some we'll use the word contract obligation that we have to wait on if in fact, but for the most part, you could meet the requirements a good.
If we can demonstrate we can meet the free and appropriate education, then if they choose not to take us up on that offer, then that is their choice, and it is
That frees that.
correct. And
We'll
then
use
we're
that
no longer
burden.
responsible for that funding because we have a free and appropriate educational spot for them.
Perfect. Okay.
Can we go to the tax slide just for awareness? Yes. I would like if you can pull the data, what this tax, it just makes me sad to see that property values go up and then that tax rate goes down, and that's just more money leaving our district. What dollar amount if the tax rate were to stay the same, as I would always love to have an override and more tax dollars for our district, what that amount would be if things were to stay equal, how much money that would equal for our district. Does that make sense when I'm asking
It
you?
totally makes sense. So if we kept at the
1.465.
And again, with the tax rate, it's actually a form produced by the Maricopa County Superintendent's Office that it is filled out with them to decide what that tax rate is. So I can definitely take that form and begin manipulating some of those numbers.
Yeah, I would just like to know. I'm like almost 17% decrease.
Well, and Member Walker, if done a couple education shows with people and we pull up a tax bill and it shows that what's been happening over the course of a year for your tax dollars going to CCUSD, and that's been a decline and a drop. The only thing that's really going up is the other line, which is the money that has to be added because our tax rate is so low, even though they've covered all of our expenses. That, I believe, last tax bill, it was like up 17%. I imagine we're going to see another climb because, again, as our property values continue to go up, but we don't need as much money to operate. So looking for that number. And like this year, I think we estimated 12.5 million going down to the general fund. We'll estimate larger than that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think EVIT went up too. Every line but ours. So EVIT and that other line, secondary line, went up, and ours went down. So
Yeah.
riddle me that one.
Any other questions? Okay. Item
Thank you.
Item 4.1, call to the public. We have none. All right. Item 6.1, proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26, presented by Dr. Plotnick.
President Carrera, we move that the governing board approve the proposed budget for the fiscal year 26 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item 7, adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, we are, it is 6:43.